This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Another big time week of NBA basketball just finished up, or wrapped up for that matter, the NBA trade deadline. And now we are into the buyout season. Oh, it's such a good time of the year. It's like basically shopping for free. It's like those big discount deals of getting players that you wish you had maybe earlier this year or maybe a year or two ago. And now you get to get them at the discounted rate of free 99, I guess, by our standards. Anyway, as always, man, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. Let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, my brother? It's buyout season, baby. Jingle, jingle. You got your shopping cart ready?
Well, I don't own a team, but at the end of the day, it's cool to talk about these guys, and it's also off the street season as well too. So if you haven't played a lick of games, your old retreads, your Carmelos, your Dwight Howards, all those names are starting to resurface here now as the trade deadline has passed, and as we inch towards NBA All-Star Weekend. So yeah, man, great time as always here to be on the baseline.
And a greater time as well too, as we've seen the NBA now being ushered in a new direction with one of the most heralded accomplishments in the game of basketball finally being broken by the king of our generation in LeBron James. We'll talk about that in a few moments. And we also got a couple of things that are taking place post NBA trade deadline that we'll get into in our news and notes. So as always, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. As always, be sure to get on my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Game Face Lee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. Wherever you put the baseline in, just add us on and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. You can also catch us and the family on 19 Media Group. 19 Media Group be running these content sheets. So whether it be sports, entertainment, music, culture, you want it, we got it. Go to www.19mediagroup.com to get your fix on everything happening in the present day culture that we live in. All right, Shaw. So let's get right into some of the news and notes. Obviously, we are now beyond the NBA trade deadline. All of these moves that we went in conversation with our previous episode. And for those who didn't have an chance to do that, go to www.thebaselinenba.com so you can catch our trade deadline episode where we broke down the plethora of trades that went down, which were the most significant and not significant, which moved the needle, which didn't move the needle. There's a couple of things that have kind of taken place since the trade deadline. Number one, the trade with the Golden State Warriors trying to bring back their guy, Gary Payton II. There seems to be an issue now with regards to this trade. The Warriors did a treat, basically almost like a three-way deal, through a trade that they made with the Detroit Pistons, sending James Wiseman over and getting draft picks, and then using those draft picks to get Gary Payton II. But apparently, Gary Payton II has not passed his physical, and in doing so, it has basically put this trade deal in jeopardy. As we're recording this conversation, the Golden State Warriors have basically until today to be able to make a decision on whether or not they want to still move forward, given now the known circumstance and the extent of Gary Payton's injuries and how long it's going to sideline him, or this trade goes kibosh. And I think it opens up, a wormhole of issues and things that I guess were left unsaid in, legitimizing and making this deal go through.
Well, I think what's going to end up happening is, because what I said on our trade deadline show was it was more of a salary dump, and getting Gary Payton II was a nice story for them. Another guy who presumably would be able to guard on the wing. So they felt like they really kind of mastered the system to some degree, got all those picks, flipped them immediately, but also dumped the salary of Wiseman, which would have just been an exponential tax bill for them from the luxury tax side. I think, and by the time this records, I could very well be wrong, I think Golden State continues and upholds the trade. I think they still realize there's value in Gary Payton. If he's able to return for the playoffs in some capacity, that obviously is still valuable. And then the salary savings that they were trying to get off with, again, moving on from Wiseman, it's still a wonky. Like, I don't know how you bring Wiseman back into the situation now. I mean, I guess you could just send him to the G League, so to speak. But remember, it's also a trade with Detroit and Atlanta. And, Atlanta would love to have Sadiq Bey in tow. So I think it all kind of hinges on what Golden State ultimately wants to do. But my hunch tells me is that they'll do it because it was saving them so much money to begin with.
I think it's a good point on your part. And I think the other thing as well, too, is, look, you're the Golden State Warriors. You've been the model of success. I don't think you want this, tainting, Bob Myers' ability to go out and negotiate and navigate through deals. It's ironic because the Golden State Warriors, over the stretch of years that they've had this dynasty, have not been the type of team that have really been active during the NBA trade deadline. I mean, they've pretty much rolled with their guys, and either it's been something that they've done through buyout or they've done it through the offseason. You don't really see them making, mid-season moves, but clearly they see the writing on the wall with this team. They need something else. They need more, and they cannot continue to hold on to the current assets they have in hopes that they will figure things out and be ready to participate in what could possibly be the final run that they can make to getting a championship with the way that this team is constructed. But again, this is forward thinking by the Golden State Warriors, because if this becomes a process of a slow rebuild or a transitional process, they don't want to be that team that is depriving other teams opportunities because they're the Warriors. I don't think they did, they want to get that marker being thrown on them. So I do find it interesting that if they do decide to go through with it, it has to be because of the quality and the character of the player, what they know that he's capable of bringing to this team. And I think the other thing as well, too, is just the way that the team has been labeled and the reputation that they build as an organization and a franchise. They don't want to lose on that, in the NBA community and whole amongst other executives.
Listen to you. Look at you. You taking the high road. I think the Warriors and Lake Up and Myers are like, we need to save this tax bill. So it could be. I think it's more about the
money,
altruistic aspects of like, hey, we want to be good trade partners. I'll tell you what, they'll probably never do a deal with the Portland Trailblazers again, seeing that if the medical staff was a little less than forthcoming. I think that might be an issue moving forward. But to me, I think it's more about the dollar than even the player and that of itself too, or the feelings around what it would do to Atlanta and Detroit.
Interestingly enough, Shaw, if it was just those two teams, you think that the Warriors would have walked on it in a heartbeat?
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know. And again, I don't want to be disingenuous about the answer. I said, I think again, in my situation, if it were me, I'm probably not going through with the deal because I don't want something. I don't want a player who cannot contribute in the way that I originally thought he was going to. But the Warriors are a very, very wealthy team, and they've made their money hand over fist.
Riches.
So I don't know. It's a wonky situation, but we'll see where it lands. By the time this airs, we will have a resolution one way or another.
All right. So interesting things happen right after the NBA trade deadline. And I think we've seen this over the last few years. When certain names get thrown out in that trading ethos, so to speak, you kind of say to yourself, I wonder what they were really thinking. I wonder what they truly felt. We've had moments, guys like, Jaylen Brown, guys like Tyrese Halliburton kind of expressed themselves on the, oh my God moments and yeah, I've heard this before, doesn't faze me, or yeah, I'm a little salty about it, but it's the business. And they say quite all the right things, but then technically they're also saying, oh, you gonna make this right. You know what I'm saying? We've never heard of quote unquote trade reparations, but some of these dudes, man, they want theirs, right? Well, here's an interesting twist with the Boston Celtics. Look, Peyton Pritchard has been with this organization now for close to 4 or 5 years now. And we've often said, I've actually have liked Peyton Pritchard. I thought that he was a quality player. I expected, more from him. I thought that the Celtics in drafting him were going to utilize him more. Maybe things haven't worked out the way that it's supposed to, but I think he's been finding his footing over the last couple of seasons. And he's been very crucial during certain significant stretches where Marcus Smart's been injured and they didn't have a Malcolm Brogdon to lean on and things of that nature. Could it have made him this expendable even this season where Brad Stevens might even move him? He says that he admits he wanted to be traded. And I do find this interesting because you don't hear too many players saying, especially when they're a part of a successful team, a team that is just once removed from being in the NBA finals, making those type of admissions. Maybe they'll make those admissions maybe 3-4 years down the road. Maybe there's a level of saltiness because of something that took place, in that short time span or whatever the case may be. But I do find it interesting that a guy like Peyton Pritchard does admit that he did want to be traded, from the Boston Celtics, even though he's now been showing more and more usefulness, so to speak, in the way that Missoula has been utilizing Peyton Pritchard. I don't know what it is. Maybe you can speak to it, Shaw, but it is a very interesting take from Peyton Pritchard's part.
I mean, at the end of the day, just as a player who wants to get on the floor and the opportunities are not there. If you take it from Pritchard's standpoint, had a decent rookie season. Then the second year, they kind of change things around. I think he goes to summer league and feels like, hey, you know what, I'm gonna be that guy, and have, not necessarily not he's gonna start, but he's gonna get some playing time. They make some other roster adjustments that preclude that from happening. He doesn't have the best of years. Even fast forward to this offseason now, they bring in Malcolm Brogdon. Feel like in essence that he wasn't enough to kind of hold down the fort down there. And I think he's being honest. I don't think he thinks he's a better player than Malcolm Brogdon, but he's just not going to be able to get those minutes, especially after the acquisition of Derek White last year as well too. So for him, he keeps getting pushed further and further down the depth chart. And while the situation is one where Boston is winning and has a chance at the NBA championship, he's a young guy. He's coming towards the tail end of his rookie contract now. So what would somebody give him? He hasn't had a chance to play and prove himself. So I think he's thinking about the dollar as well too. So the situation in essence kind of be damned. But I don't think he's going to be a problem. He'll buck up here and play out the rest of the season. Hopefully, be a good contributor to what they do and whatever minutes he gets, and then prove himself to be worthy. Potentially, traded, around the draft time or in as a maybe some sort of free agent move, in the summer. But I can understand where he's coming from. But you're right. You don't usually hear that, especially kind of like from a, I don't want to say second tier role player, but again, somebody with his status currently, you don't really hear that all too often.
It is, like I said, Shaw, just to me, it's interesting. And by no stretch of the imagination am I saying he should keep his mouth shut. I probably am saying that this is a refreshing viewpoint, so to speak, at a time where most players will probably kind of keep their mouth shut. Now, I don't know if that's because of the culture that Missoula is creating, or, it may be the way that Brad Stevens has allowed these guys to accentuate themselves in a way that allows them, the freedom to speak their truth, so to speak. And I don't think it should be held against them if they feel that kind of way. Maybe that's enough motivation to allow him to go out there and to be able to play in a way where he's like, hey, yeah, I'm definitely trying to play so that there's a more of a demand for me if the current team that I'm playing for, doesn't see me fitting in with what their future plans are going to look like. So, again, interesting perspective, but it speaks more to, the trends of sort of the freedoms that the players now have in speaking their mind about, situations that are conducted as the business of the NBA. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, getting into our news and notes. Let's transition, Shaw. Anthony Edwards, De'Aaron Fox, and Pascal Siakam. All of these guys have been named as replacements for the NBA All-Star Weekend, which will be taking place in the next few days or so, or actually next weekend as we're recording this show. Listen, well-deserved. I don't see any issues with that specifically. It is kind of interesting, man, that, because we're in such an interesting space of how we view the NBA All-Star Weekend, you say to yourself, these guys were already all-stars to begin with, but to have to be named as replacements, does it irk you that it's like they have to replace all-stars because they weren't good enough to be all-stars, even though the statistics and what they've been doing for their teams warrant the idea that they should be all-stars?
No, because we all know this is a popularity contest more than anything else, with not only the fans, but even the coaches to some degree. Paul George is a great player. He's a great basketball player, probably Hall of Famer, etc. Better than Aaron Gordon, better than even Anthony Edwards and De'Aaron Fox overall. Is Paul George an all-star this year? No. In my humble opinion, no, but the coaches voted him in based on that. So as long as you have that human element kind of in the room, things like this are always going to happen. And then again, if guys get injured, so forth and so forth. So it's nice to see that, in essence, hey, they still get a chance to go. And I think all of these three were the right decisions. On our all-star list, I think we left Fox off of the list because we included Aaron Gordon specifically, who's still not on the all-star team as it currently stands. And Siakam got left off. I forget for who, in the Eastern Conference initially. Forget how that went, but he was on our original list. And so it's nice to see that all these three guys get there. I said point blank, hey, this is certified fresh. These are all the right replacement selections. So I'm just glad they got there one way or another.
My only thing, and I guess I'll say this, is guys like Anthony Edwards and De'Aaron Fox are going to wind up getting a raw deal oftentimes, only because they're in a situation uniquely where their markets or who they represent, they literally have to be the king of where they are for people to give them the props that they deserve, which kind of sucks, right? Like being a Minnesota Timberwolf, you would think would be something. It's like it's a unique situation, place, team altogether. And him being the dynamic player that he is would warrant, in this day and age of social media and the outlets that athletes have in order to, propel themselves to quote unquote popularity, as you would use for the purposes of All-Star, would put him in that conversation each and every single time. Whereas when what we're talking about is, does his numbers match up to the better of those guys at his position to say that he's going to be the all-star reserve or all-star starter, whatever the case may be? Whereas in De'Aaron Fox, he's a part of a state in which there are already 3 other teams that represent NBA basketball. And so he literally has to be the king of his position for him to be highlighted in such a way. You know what I'm saying? And that sucks. It just really does suck. Because no matter what we're saying here, Shaw, won't make a bit of difference if the Sacramento Kings are not a viable team contending and the Minnesota Timberwolves are not a legit team who's contending. If they're not contending, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be starting so far in the back of the pack that the numbers are never going to help propel them in such a way. And I'm not just talking about the market. I'm just talking about the circumstances, the situations of where they reside.
Yeah. And just to correct my earlier statement, it was DeRozan who I was like, huh? over Siakam. So I'm just glad Pascal got him there now. And if there's any other injuries, I'd imagine Jalen Brunson and Aaron Gordon would probably be next up, respectively.
Yeah, that's the waiting list at the deli.
Exactly what it is.
They had to pull the ticket and they're just waiting to get called. Oh my goodness. Oh my God. All right, Shaw. Let's go ahead and round out our news and notes with regards to accomplishment of accomplishments. LeBron James says to hell, we're waiting until the end of the week to drop this, this hot 36 to get me beyond Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to break the all-time leading scoring record. He does it earlier during the week. And look, I know we'll get into the accomplishment, but I got to admit, man, one of the funnier moments was the shot that basically LeBron broke the record, the fadeaway. Everybody is, looking at the fadeaway, and everyone is looking at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's face when LeBron, basically breaks the record. I mean, I know that's what broke the internet. I felt like what broke the internet was, I forget who it was. Was it Gabriel? I think it was Gabriel.
Thomas Bryant on the seal.
Thomas Bryant. Okay, your man, right? Mr. Dr. Strange. We're going to start calling Thomas Bryant Dr. Strange. Dr. Strange is in the post demanding for the basketball. Now, I don't know if he's doing this just to kind of make it look like a legit NBA play moment or whatever, but hey. I have to listen. I got it. If not dumb, but bold. I'll give him bold for even thinking that ball was going to go his way at any point during that stretch that LeBron's about to break this record. My man TB.
Yeah, Thomas Bryant with the fundamental post seal.
That was a TB12 moment, Shaw. TB12 moment.
He had SGA on his back. He had the deep post position. Right hand. He was gonna drop step, pull up, put the layup on him, or pull, just put up and dunk on him one way or another. Thomas Bryant promptly gets shipped over to Denver a couple of days later. So, I think there's some irony in that. But I mean, all jokes aside, I mean, it was again, I don't blame Thomas Bryant for being down there. I mean, what are you going to do? But LeBron with an amazing accomplishment. What more can you really say about this individual who has just stood the test of time, is probably going to be averaging 20 points per game, into his 40s. He might be 41 years old and still averaging over 20 a game, which is just insane to think about. A couple of years from now, his son will probably be in tow, and more records will fall to LeBron James' wayside, if you will. And I think is he top 3 already? I know he's top 5 already in assists as well too. So I mean, just remarkable stuff from this guy. It was amazing to see him kind of go out there and say, "I'm getting it done." Ironically, as we record, he hasn't played a game since, but that's neither here or there.
So a couple things. Number one, not that I know people have already have him, in the Mount Rushmore, from his other accolades. This helps me feel more secure about him being in the Mount Rushmore. To do this and to still have more left in the tank, I just think is absolutely remarkable. And I think people have to stop the idea that it's just about being the freakish athlete that he is. Yes, that is a very important emphasis on why he's able to do this. It's an important emphasis for him to be able to do it as quickly as he's done it. Okay. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was well in the latter stages of his career and just barely hanging on by a thread in the way that the NBA was evolving, where he just was becoming a dinosaur of the past. So while he did break the record, right, and he became that leader, he wasn't scoring in a multitude of ways that you see LeBron James doing. And he wasn't handling the teams the way LeBron James is handling teams that he's been doing. And he hasn't even hit the age of 40. So I feel like with LeBron James, I feel like that this scoring record is going to stand the test of time for an extremely long time. And part of that is because of the ability for him to stay healthy for the majority of his career, and for the ability for him to manage himself and the way that he goes about playing the game of basketball in the modern era. That to me is what I think speaks volumes about his adjustment and him elevating himself into being one of the Mount Rushmores of players. I just think that when you're part of that class, it's not just only singularly in one way that you've impacted the game of basketball. And I'm going to say this, and I'm not trying to sound, mean or trying to put a hex on the future of the NBA. This record, I don't see it being broken anytime soon. Okay. Even if you wanted to throw LeBron's kids in the mix, LeBron's kids are going to have to be in the NBA by next year to give themselves even a formidable chance to do what LeBron James has been doing and is going to continue to keep doing until he chooses not to do it any longer. The way that the NBA is structured is still designed for LeBron James to still be a viable piece. It's just a question of whether or not he wants to do it. And you only have so many players that can transition themselves in doing it that way. In football, it's Tom Brady, right? In baseball, it's probably Albert Pujols, with the way that he ended his season. He could have probably played like another year or two in the DH spot and continue to jack home runs and still hit somewhere around 260, 270, which for his age and his development would still be considered like hitting 300 like in his early years. There's only so many players that can do those type of things. And it's easy to be, because we're caught about the player in the current generation and the way that they're surrounded by the rest of the other talent that we're enamored with. What LeBron James is doing right now to me is absolutely phenomenal. And I just think it's going to be a hard task for any of the other guys who are in the midst. Like Kevin Durant ain't breaking this record. Okay. Yeah. He ain't breaking it. It's as great as he is as a player. And we don't know where he'll be when this is all said and done, but he ain't breaking this record. Yeah. Kyrie Irving, I'm sure ain't breaking this record. Steph Curry ain't breaking this record.
You gotta look at younger guys who are just kind of like come out blazing. So like Luka would be like the closest person, even as a rookie to be able to average, 20 plus per game, in that. So you can't have that much ground to make up. You know what I mean? Even Tatum, he wasn't at the height of his superpowers almost, if you will, coming right out into the league, if you will. And then I think when it comes to like a guy like Luka, this is not a knock. I think just in terms of the physicality that LeBron played, and LeBron has had various iterations of his own body over the course of time, where he came into the league as like a super uber athlete, so to speak, and then kind of developed into this guy who can hit jumpers and, do a little bit more from the post, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas Luka, we're never going to see like Luka flying and jamming over people. He has to be this way for the majority of his career. And while he can get stronger, he's never going to be what LeBron was, and neither is Tatum. Tatum's not as athletic as LeBron.
The only person that I think would probably have had an opportunity to do it, opportunity, not chance, opportunity, was Giannis. But that was predicated on him developing the ability to shoot the 3-ball. He does not do that, right? Like, I'm not saying that he doesn't have that to do it. He doesn't do it enough. And in the transition of his career, at some point, It's still going to be about him dominating, being more paint oriented, mid-range oriented. He ain't shooting that three to the degree that like a LeBron James is capable of shooting the three at this stage of his career. So that's the reason why it's like, and I would have said he could have been the closest one to do it, because if there's anyone that can still dominate the game at a high level for years still forward, barring injury, it would be Giannis. But to your point, because Luka's game is so well-rounded and his ability to score both beyond the arc and underneath the arc, to me, spells like he just has to continue to have those moments, those stretches where he's just literally doing the type of things that he's doing. And then eventually LeBron just goddamn well stop. That's how that has to play.
Yeah, I mean, again, you just think about year over year over year over year. LeBron has never, and I mean ever, averaged less than 20 a game, ever. So, you look at, even Tatum coming in that first year, 13, second year, 15, and now he's at 23, now all the way up to 30 a game. Like, you have so much ground to make up even just from that. And then in terms of being healthy and the longevity of it as well, too. So while LeBron has missed more than a handful of games here in the last, 2-3 years, really since becoming a Laker, what he did to begin his career at age 19 and was healthy for all those years, you look back at it, bro, it's insane. It's 70, 80. Like, it just, the games played are just there. It's remarkable, compared to what others are doing. So I think it's not we're not prisoners of the moment here by saying it's like, I don't see how this record gets broken, because who's going to come here and play 20 plus years at this level? 20 plus years averaging over 20 a game.
Mm-hmm.
That's stupidity. That's insane. It's insane. And you have to have a certain level of dedication, to the physical aspect as well as the mental aspect of this as well. Staying out of trouble, in the court of public opinion and all of that. He's been able to do. And while, again, we can say all the things, and some of those things are true. Yes, he has his, he has his tribe and his people who make sure that things maybe go hush hush, if you will, and don't go bump in the night for him. But at the end of the day, he is remarkable and, quite possibly the greatest person to ever play the game.
Whew, tall order. The rest of the NBA again. You're up. Anybody want to leap over this this fame? Nobody's trying to touch that. Anyway. The only person who's still speaking on it probably will be Michael Jordan.
Well, yeah. MJ forever, yo. MJ forever.
Exactly. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, we have the breakdown. Buyout. It's buyout season, man. We're going to talk about some of these position players, whether or not the guard and the wing, or maybe even the center position, are primal places or primal positions that we'll be looking guys to get picked up and added onto rosters. We'll get into that and a whole lot more here on The Baseline. Time to break it down. To the bone gristle. Time now for the breakdown. Callie, Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And our topic for the breakdown, it's buyout season, man. So once trade deadline passes, then, you got a bunch of guys who probably got moved. And, teams are like, listen, man, we did this strictly for the Skrilla. So that means we appreciate you helping us get what we need, and we will no longer need your services, and negotiate a buyout for some of these guys. And, that just gives opportunity for some of these players to find teams where they think that they can either contribute, continue their storied career, or maybe to bring, start a story of a career, and, or, in and of itself, continue to get paid in this game. So we got a ton of players out there, Shaw. Ironically, like, it's weird because over the last few years, it's usually been predicated on after the trade deadline or after the trade has happened. There are 3 or 5 people specifically that you look at and you say, yeah, they're probably going to get bought out and they're probably going to wind up going to this team. And then you focus your attention on the teams that they think that they're going to go to. I think the climate has changed now. I think that there's so many different players that are out there in that buyout, circle, so to speak, then now I think it becomes a question of, what do you think teams truly need? And with the amount of talent that reflects, for those positions, what's the trend looking like? Is it that more guards are going to be needed, for this stretch run? Do you think more wings are going to be needed for this stretch run, or maybe centers, or power forwards? Those front court players are going to be needed for those stretch runs. So it's interesting, Shaw, because we weren't like this about 3-4 years ago, right? Like before, it was more a handful of names, maybe 5 or 6 names. Bro, we have like well over like somewhat 30 names of dudes who potentially can get picked up after they get bought out, or just sitting there languishing out there for teams to say we're going to need this guy now for the final 20 something games remaining, for us to figure out where we're going to be and whether or not we can really make this run to an NBA Finals.
Yeah, it's hiring a mercenary to end out the season. And so I think when you see a trade like what Phoenix did to acquire Kevin Durant, obviously they trade a lot of their depth, but know that the buyout market could be very lucrative to them because people are going to say, "Hey, that's a championship team. Hey, I'll finish out the year for your veterans minimum or your MLE or your mid-level taxpayer or whatever it is, whatever you can slot me into. I'll take, kind of pennies on the dollar here for my quote unquote value to potentially win a championship and then boost my value going into the summer."
Right.
So there's, like you alluded to, there are a lot of names and guys who at least are or already have been bought out or be rumored to be potentially on their way to the buyout. But as I alluded to as well in the beginning of the show, it's also off the street season. So Carmelo and Dwight Howard and DeMarcus Cousins, all those familiar names. I was thinking the other day, whatever happened to Alfred Payton and Eric Bledsoe? Those guys just kind of went away. So, I think the market more or less right now is for wings. So primarily 3-and-D, which, everybody in the NBA always consistently wants, and a little bit more for backup bigs and people who present some size and can defend in the middle as well, too. I think the guard market is maybe not as lucrative as it might usually be, or not necessarily lucrative as a need for teams, but definitely wings and maybe some big men, like true guys who can play the 4 and 5 and can play some defense.
All right, so let's focus our attention then on those particular positions, and then we can probably round it off. By interest, I know that Russell Westbrook is likely not going to stay with the Utah Jazz, and we can get into where we think that he might go, but I'm really more particularly interested, Shaw, on where you're looking at when you talk about wings and forward and centers and stuff. Now, we already know that Terrence Ross is off the market. He's now with the Phoenix Suns. But what other guys do you possibly see as saying, you know what, him probably going to said team, whatever, this would be a wise move on their part, picking him up simply because out of the rest of the guys that we're looking at, definitely somebody who I think can be an asset and can help them on those, in that stretch run.
So I'm going to start with the wings and start primarily at teams that probably need to make the moves the most. So with Phoenix getting Terrence Ross, they're still in the market maybe for another big into some degree, but they feel like they've addressed the wing situation to some level. So that leaves Miami, Dallas, Boston as probably 3 teams who definitely are still looking for wing and / stretch 4-ish type help, if you will. A guy like Will Barton and Danny Green might fit for Boston. They want somebody. So Barton is more of a scoring, slashing type player, has been able to shoot, plus 30%, for the 3-point line. Danny Green is obviously more of a 3-point shooter. I think Boston might also have some interest in Justin Holiday. But I think all of those guys, with the exception of Green, would also intrigue Miami and Dallas specifically. I don't think Green fits for them, although Green might work in Dallas as a spot up guy, but they already have Tim Hardaway Jr. and some others out there. So I think they want more dynamic, type scoring, if you will, and Barton and Holiday to some degree represent some of that as well. You could also look at taking a flyer on a guy like Kevin Knox if he's bought out from Portland, and wants to kind of understand as well too if he's bought out from Utah. But I think those 3 names to me, Barton, Holiday, and Green, just because of the championship level of experience, those 3 guys are going to have a lot of interest from some of those teams out there looking for wings.
Yeah, I like where you're going with Barton and Holiday and Green. Green, I'm a little suspect on because his mobility to me just seems like it continues to limit him over and over again. I think if you're the Boston Celtics, part of what you want is your team to be more athletically elevated. They have a very grounded, very tough-minded basketball team. But I think one thing that they've compromised or they've given up with some of the young players that they've let go. And look, Brogdon is a solid player. He's not the most athletic, right? And they have a deep team. but they don't have a balanced athletic team to add to that. Guys like Will Barton, guys like Justin Holiday would probably be on my radar. I'm not high on a guy like Kevin Knox, not because I don't think that he wouldn't help the team. It's just that he doesn't have enough playoff experience, or he doesn't have enough experience playing in situational basketball that I think the Celtics are going to need if they have to put somebody out there for certain stretch minutes where maybe some of the bigs wind up getting in trouble, maybe some of the wing players get in trouble, and they just want them out there to maintain that level of, defensive, capabilities that we expect the Celtics are going to need to be in order for them to get through the East, to get to the NBA Finals. So it'll be interesting to see, like, if we're talking about teams like the Celtics, but primarily any playoff-based team that is very similarly built to how the Celtics are built.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Knox and Toscano Anderson specifically, if they are to be bought out or moved in any capacity, bought out, waived, you're looking at teams who may have just extra roster spots. Say, hey, these guys are still relatively young. We'll take a flyer just to kind of see how they do and see if we want to get into like their quote unquote bird rights, for the summer, and then maybe retain them long term. So I think that's where guys like that probably land. Whereas Barton, Holiday, and Green, as you alluded to, because they have a certain level of experience and even expertise and some accomplishments within the league, they're going to be held at a higher value, I think, for especially those contending teams. So I can't imagine them going to subpar situations to finish out the season.
All right, let's focus our attention, Shaw, to the front courts. Like you were mentioning before, bigs are probably going to be in demand. And look, there are definitely teams that we feel like they're going to need some. They're going to need some girth, in the front court position. They're going to need some heavy hitter, heavy pushers out there to log in some minutes, to be able to at least, pose some kind of presence in the paint, just simply because of the way that some of these teams are structured with their wing players, their two guard players, and their ability to penetrate, get into the paint, and get those buckets, right? Like, you got to prepare for the Jason Tatum, Jaylen Browns, of the world. And much the same if you're someone who's got to be able to post up against a Joel Embiid. If you're in the Eastern Conference or out in the Western Conference, got to be able to deal with the likes of an Anthony Davis or a Nikola Jokic, right? Or if eventually Karl Anthony Towns, is comes back and is 100%. So they're going to have to contend with that. What are we talking about with the field of guys that are available from the front court, forward and center position?
Yeah, so I think the biggest name on the list, who has in essence reached out the buyout, is Serge Ibaka. Dwayne Dedmon has also reached a buyout. From with the San Antonio Spurs. Sarek is
real quick before you get into the rest of these other guys. Does it surprise you that Ibaka himself is being kind of languishing out there? I would have thought that he would have been a key player to have been used over these last couple of seasons. It doesn't seem like that's been the case, even though he's one of the more sought after people, these tendencies of either getting bought out, this, that, and the third.
I mean, I just don't think he's had an opportunity to really do much, and still a little longer in the tooth and injury prone to some degree here now. The situation in Milwaukee, like, again, I think how much have we praised Brook Lopez on our show here this year alone? So I just don't know where the minutes would come from, especially with the way Bobby Portis has played off the bench as well too. So there was just nothing for him to do in Milwaukee, because in theory he is stretchy as a 4/5. I think Miami should have a lot of interest in potentially bringing him on. Dedmon was a guy who they had, obviously, and moved him to try to create a different roster spot to maybe go in another direction. There's some other rumors going on about Pat Riley at the trade deadline. I don't know if you saw some of that, but we'll get into that maybe later. But Ibaka might make sense to allow Bam to play to play 4 rather. So what they've been talking about primarily is that they probably really wanted more of a stretch 4 per se. Well, if you get a stretch 5, then Bam doesn't necessarily have to change his game up too much, and Ibaka can be that guy who can still space the floor but still give you rim protection on the defensive side. I think Miami would be a perfect landing spot for Ibaka, if they were to be so inclined. I haven't heard that there's been any interest in him specifically, but I do feel like he's like somebody that a lot of teams will be taking a look at. Interestingly enough, had Denver not made the move to get Thomas Bryant, I think they could have probably used a guy like Serge Ibaka behind them to back up Joker. But Phoenix, again, same similar teams, if you will. I can't imagine that Philly would make another move. I don't know if you have another roster spot that would make some sense, to back up Embiid. But I think Ibaka's a guy, and Dedmon, who are going to get some interest out there. And watch Sarek if he becomes available from OKC.
Why are we talking about Kevin Love, bro? Like, it's amazing to me that, look, I get what the Cleveland Cavaliers had or were doing with regards to him. I still think that he can give you something, but and understandable loyalty and playing for the organization, who put you in a position for you to get your one championship, and you rolled with the transition of where the team is going. But it's obvious JB Bickerstaff doesn't utilize him because this team now has a different identity. Like, it looks completely different than what was originally intended and how they were trying to use Kevin Love, right? So now what we're talking about with Kevin Love is that he can still do those things that has always been his claim to fame in being the player that he's always been. I still think that there's opportunity there, and it's, to me, the team that needs that the most, right? Will we finally ever see Kevin Love play for the Golden State Warriors?
Well, I mean, if he's bought out, and I think his name is one that's the biggest surprise to me to some degree, because Cleveland, he acquiesced and really turned, I think, his professionalism around to some degree, and just said, hey, I'm going to be a good veteran within this locker room. So I appreciate what he's brought to them. I'd be interested to see if they actually kind of go through with this one way or another. Obviously, with Donovan Mitchell being there, there's just a lot less touches for everybody on the team. So even Kevin Love coming off the bench, but he's averaging 8 and 6 off the bench in 20 minutes a night. I mean, that's definitely very valuable, I think, to them or other teams. So it's just a matter of, like, do they feel like they need to get Mobley and Jared Allen to some degree, just more reps together, where Love doesn't fit into that equation? And I'd be very surprised if they were to actually buy him out. But I think he's be a name that a lot of people would bring into their locker room if he became available.
Interesting stuff. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Topic of the breakdown: buyout season. Which guys do we think might be on that move? And let's just, obviously, we just want to make sure that people understand this. And the caveat to this is that this is completely fluid, right? Like, even as we're speaking about this, something can take place within the next day or two that might dictate, guys actually getting bought out and actually going to certain teams and organizations and things of that nature. And I think the focal point that we were trying to emphasize, Shaw, is that there are a plethora of players that are out there that could actually be an asset to some of the teams, especially the teams that we know right now are positioning themselves to try to make this run, to put themselves in the best position possible to either be play-in ready, or to have access to home court advantage, at some, for the first round of the playoffs, things of that nature. And a lot of these guys are guys at some point who have been down that road, been in the playoffs, been in NBA finals, hoisted championships. They are a part of that conversation because they can bring something to the table. And it's a question of whether or not some of these organizations probably have not been there before. Is it realistic for them to say, let's go ahead and do this now, rather than waiting to figure out, like, we lost an opportunity to bring a guy like this into the fold who might be able to help us in some way, shape, or form? So with that being said, Shaw, let's go ahead and transition ourselves to the guards, right? Like, so it's not so much that the number of guards that are available, but it is the type of guards that somehow are going to be available for buyout season, so to speak. Obviously, the big name, Russell Westbrook. Is it realistic when we're talking about a guy like Russell Westbrook that he can come in understanding the circumstance, the dynamic, and adjust to and be able to contribute? Or what we're talking about is this is an experimentation where they're hoping, if they roll the dice, goes right, but everything can essentially go wrong if it's because it's just Russell Westbrook?
There's a lot I want to say about the Russ situation. To some degree, I'm perplexed that it hasn't happened already. And I know we're just a couple of days removed from the trade deadline, but there doesn't seem to be any real fit there in Utah. So I don't know if it's a matter of the overall number. Russ wants to make sure he secures a certain dollar amount. But then the rumor that it really is the Heat and Bulls that are in the lead for his services, as Woj has reported. Now, again, Woj also reported that Terrence Ross was most likely going to Dallas, and not knocking Woj and his credibility. But then the Phoenix Suns swooped in and said, nah, it's going to be us. So, but the Heat and Bulls situation for Russ is bizarre to me. Like, because I think, obviously the familiarity with Paul George in LA makes a lot of sense, still being an LA guy, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe he doesn't want that pressure, but I think there could be some some added vitriol for Russ specifically, to being in LA and obviously the Lakers across the hallway, and what were to happen if somehow the Clippers and Lakers were not necessarily to be in the playoffs, but had a chance to really kind of maybe preclude the other from kind of getting in. And I think Russ would want to play a heavy hand in that. It's just a situation, I think, ultimately where Westbrook has to understand he's not exactly who he wants to be anymore, but he's still looking for a certain amount of playing time. And Miami is the situation that is Miami and Chicago both present really, really different opportunities, because I don't think the DeRozan and Levine thing is working. So throw Russ into that equation. That seems problematic. And then if you believe into the whole Heat culture stuff, how does he fit into that? He plays hard. So that definitely lines up, but he still is maybe a little, stat hunting to some degree for what Miami's liking is. And I could see stuff with him and like Tyler Hero like going really, really left as well too. So I don't know. I don't like those situations, specifically. But I think Russ is somebody who, again, these three teams all are in some ways playoff bound, the Bulls being the shakiest of those propositions. But he could come in there and potentially help all three, but in a way that, again, he's going to kind of force his way into that situation. And, by hook or crook, he'll kind of drag them along. I think with the exception of the Clippers, where I think they have a little bit more culture established, especially with Ty Lue there as well.
Of the guys that we have, labeled, in buyout circumstances or situations, which one do you think might fail from, being able to find himself on a roster or on a team? Like the likelihood. I'm not saying that it's going to happen. It should happen. But because of the type of other players that might be out there that might be better suited, somebody might be wind up getting left off, the roster. And so I'm just trying to get an idea from you, Shaw, like who do you probably see saying he would be good for, but the likelihood is that he might not wind up finding somebody by the time the buyout season ends.
So from the guards, I'm going to say I'm not positive of John Wall's ability to contribute right now and where that would happen. With the Clippers just not working out there for various reasons, I don't know if a team, especially a contending one, is going to be willing to take a chance. Again, maybe Miami if they miss out on Russ and he goes somewhere else. But then I'd also be concerned about a guy like Pat Beverly. I'm not really sure what the fit is. I'm just not sure. And he's a defender. Guess he can shoot the three a little bit here now. He's a locker room and kind of culture guy to some degree, but I just don't know for that type of player, where it lands, specifically. So I'm not wishing them any ill will. And I just wouldn't be surprised if Wall and or Beverly didn't necessarily find a spot that they wanted to go to this year. And I think some of it's going to be there too. I don't know if Beverly just going to play because he just wants to play. But it's got to be a specific situation, I think, for both of those guys.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to those dudes, right? Like, as much as we think realistically they should be on a roster, I feel like they're so singularly set in the way that they play their game. It's not they don't want to evolve. It's just that what's needed, they can't evolve quick enough to be able to find what the other teams are going to need for them to be able to find significant time to play, like to me, it would cost too much. And I think that's one of the dynamics of why we're seeing the shift, Shaw, to your point about how wing players and forward centers, front court players seem to be more in demand. It's ironic because we keep talking about how important the guard position really is, but you're not looking, unless your star player is so injured and you don't have quality guards that can help, kind of fill in while your guards are, back on the mend or whatever the case may be. That's not what's happening here. I think pretty much everyone is locked in where they have their guards. They're going to ride or die with who they have in their backcourt. It's the front court that always seems to be like, we can't have enough players here, or we don't, we obviously are lacking in an offensive or defensive dynamic here. And I think that's where it's trending. So this could actually be one of the few seasons, Shaw, where we may not talk about it, until the end of the year. We start doing some autopsy reports and stuff. We may have to do autopsy buyouts, right? Like these guys.
Let me just say this one thing. So as I take a quick look at the league, maybe, a team like Milwaukee could maybe kick the tires on Pat Beverly, especially if Derrick Rose doesn't get bought out by New York. It just kind of fits their, their physicality style. So imagine Drew Holiday coming in and then Pat Beverly coming in behind him. So that could be a potential if they're still looking for somebody else there too, and maybe a return to Minnesota. Where he was successful and according to him led that team to the playoffs. So with some of their roster shakeup there, could he fit there potentially behind Mike Conley and Noel? So it's probably maybe not that out of the realm of the possibility for Beverly specifically. Wall, though, I am finding a harder time maybe finding a fit for him.
And listen, we were high on him, right? We wanted to see his redemption story, through. So, it's unfortunate that it's not with the Clippers, any longer. And obviously it definitely will not be with the Houston Rockets. That's for sure. But we hope that, maybe somebody changes that narrative, of how we're seeing it. I agree with you. I don't know if I see another team right now this year that's going to wind up looking to pick him up, not because I don't think that he's able to bring something to the table. It's just, what he can do and what he's able to do. Name me a team right now that's in the playoffs, that's in the playoff conversation, that they're saying John Wall does it better than what they've already got. And I think that's part of it. It's going to take a year for that assessment to really kind of, reintroduce that conversation again, because what John Wall dynamically brought different to the table, what he's able to do some 10 years ago was where the NBA was. Where the NBA is doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the fastest, but you definitely have to be the smartest. You definitely have to be the most athletic. You definitely have to, be able to shoot in a way that separates you from what the other guys are doing. You got to be able to lead. Like all of these things we've always said that has never been, quote unquote, the best qualities of John Wall, even though John Wall was by far one of the most athletically dynamic guards to come during our time frame within the last 10, 15 years. Injuries and everything like that compromised it. It is a shame. A lot of that didn't get a chance to evolve. So we don't know what this looks like now in the twilight of his career. But at this stage, where is it that he can find himself amongst the 16 teams that we're going to be talking about when it really comes down to that playoff run? Forget the play-ins, but the playoff runs, essentially. It's going to be weird, man. It's going to be weird. Hopefully he'll keep doing it.
Yeah, I'll kind of close with this. I'm trying to, as we're talking, it's like, maybe I'm squinting to see it. I'm squinting hard. Maybe John Wall in a backup situation behind the Aaron Fox in Sacramento. Maybe. I
thought about it. I thought about it possibly.
Kind of like their best passer, and then Fox is there. So Davion Mitchell and they all kind of share point guard responsibilities there. Even Terrence Davis to some degree, and Malik Monk really more of a shooter than anything else. But maybe Wall behind Fox there in a playoff situation. That's what I'm saying. Again, when you add that caveat, it's just hard to. And you said it. Like I love what you said. Like he's coming in to be a backup. And is your current backup worse than what John Wall currently is? And their answer to that in most equations is no, unless you don't have anything at all. And I don't know if that Sacramento has a true backup point guard in any capacity.
It would have been interesting if the Indiana Pacers, for example, were in a situation like they're much better off than where they've been. And obviously they've fallen off since the injury to Tyrese Halliburton. That in and of itself would have made a call to the Indiana Pacers, maybe getting a guy like John Wall could help that team if they truly believe that this was, they still want to try to make this happen. Now they're still, in the conversation, so to speak, but that's a faint conversation to be had about whether or not they can even find themselves in the play-in, right? But again, it just goes to the point about where teams are, how they're looking at their backcourt situation and position. Does it warrant a guy like John Wall that they can bring him in to do the things that they need or they feel is necessary for them to continue, to move forward with what they want to do? I'm hoping a team does, but it's hard to shake that idea, that sentiment, until we get to the offseason and really assess where the rosters are and where organizations are leaning, like what direction they're moving forward and where a guy like John Wall can come in. Because in all honesty, Shaw, it's not even about the veteran play, so to speak, of John Wall. Like there's nothing that John Wall is going to be able to say or do that's going to, I feel like benefit what other guys are gaining from, because a lot of everything that John Wall is speaking to is more from a life experience perspective about what the game of basketball, what he went through and where the game of basketball fell in his priorities. So him coming in, it's almost like him being a rookie all over again, right? And I feel like if you're bringing him in, it has to be because he is bringing a dynamic on the basketball court that is lacking for a team that is bringing him in. That's what I'm looking at, which is very different when we talk about what veterans can do for other teams. Like if you go get a Kevin Love, while Kevin Love may not give you 15 and 10 because he's not getting those minutes, and clearly his position is not affording him the opportunity to do it in that kind of way or that system, the ability that he's been to an NBA championship, he's hoisted an NBA championship, and that he has veteran presence, he is an asset to a team that lacks it, right? You can't say that for someone like John Wall because he has some playoff experience, but he's never actually done significant things in a while where all of that now is relevant to what the current state of some of these teams are in at that moment.
Yeah, I think quite frankly put, there's levels to this. I think when it comes to being a veteran and your ability to contribute to a locker room, and I just think there's certain people who have certain perceptions about them in terms of what they'd be able to add or bring, holistically. And unfortunately, I think at this time, just because of Wall's injury past and things like that, he's not the hey, the guy that people are going to rally around, especially after he trashed Houston and all those things. Like there's just a lot of weird stuff kind of associated with him, but he's had a really, really rough go of things, obviously personally. And, we wish him well with all of that too. And I'm sure we'll see John Wall again. I just don't know what capacity that will be this year.
Funny how we had the conversation, focus on, but there's some interesting guys that are in the conversation of the buyout, season that, it speaks more to what we would like to see happen, what we're expecting to see happen, and what we think may happen, right? And it all just kind of, carries itself into the dynamics and the situations and where those players lie in the conversation. Awesome show all around, my man, as always, man. And it, it's funny because we haven't even got to NBA All-Star Weekend. Right, all of this, and we haven't even got to All-Star Weekend, so it's still leading up to be a very, very interesting time right now with everything happening with the teams and the transitioning that's taking place. This is good stuff, man. I like this stretch run we're on.
Yes, sir. So we'll see how it goes here for the last 20 plus games as the season kind of comes to a close. March 1st is your deadline, for teams to be on new rosters to be able to be playoff eligible. So always keep that in mind if you're a, a fan and consumer of the NBA. And we'll do a little all-star wrap up next week. Obviously, there'll be a week before game, between games and stuff like that as well too. So we'll wrap it up, but I didn't feel like we need to do a preview of any of that stuff like too. I was like, I don't know. I was looking at the dunk contest participants and celebrity game. I was like, who are these dudes? So let's just wait to see how it plays out, and we'll definitely wrap things up here next week on All-Star Weekend.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So once again, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week for the Baseline. Kyle Lee Warren, y'all. We appreciate you guys. We do. And we'll catch up with you next time.